So getting back on track. Thank you, Sarah, for the initial introduction of MLPs. So sorry to everyone for the interruption. As Sarah said, my name is Logan Malik. I am the Clean Energy Director at MCAN. And now that Sarah has given a little bit of an introduction of MLPs, I'm really excited about talking about this new report that we are about to release right after this webinar tonight. And this scorecard, it's just so, to give context, it follows from the original scorecard that MCAN put out in 2019. And like the previous one, its goal is to inform MLP residents, customers, climate advocates, and a whole lot of other stakeholders across the state about what efforts are taking place in MLPs to mitigate climate change and to transition to a clean energy future. Since that last report, we got a lot of great feedback about what worked really well, what didn't work so well, and what we could change. And I think we've really put forward a report that addresses a lot of those concerns. And we're really excited. We hope that it will be able to serve a broad group of stakeholders in a very effective way. So in order to introduce this scorecard, I am going to talk briefly about exactly what we did in the report and kind of orient you all in like what you should expect, what the content of this report actually will look like. I am then going to talk about the scores and give a bit of a summary of how they should be interpreted. And I'm going to finish by providing some key conclusions before passing it back to Sarah to talk through some recommendations that we have moving forward. So with that, I'll jump right into it. What we did is we analyzed MLPs across 4 key performance categories: energy transition, energy efficiency, transparency and community engagement, and MLP policy context. And that last one kind of reflects MLPs and local governments' efforts to create a policy context that facilitates the transition to a clean energy future. As you can see, a large portion of the points go to the energy transition section, and similarly, there's quite a few points that go to energy transition. And this is another picture, just to give you a sense. If you didn't see it already, we did score MLPs out of 100 points, but we also included significant bonus points. And this was for a number of reasons. I'd say the major reason was we really wanted to ensure that we were giving MLPs credit for their efforts in areas that we may not have accounted for elsewhere in the report. So we tried to be generous in a lot of different areas and make sure we were accounting for as much of the work that MLPs are doing, while also acknowledging that we probably didn't get it all. And from this analysis, from our analysis using these 4 performance categories, we produced a very comprehensive report. The total page number is about 136 pages, and that should not scare you. Don't worry. There's plenty of tables and graphs, and it's quite easy to navigate and to digest. I think the reason why I mentioned that is just to kind of compare between the last scorecard, which was about 31 pages long. And so it should just give you a sense of how, we really aimed to increase the level of detail, increase the level of information. And in that way, we could give you all a more useful tool to work with. And you don't need to read the entire report in order to get, to get a good understanding of what is taking place in MLPs, though we certainly encourage it. We provide an executive summary that has everything that you need to know on a top line, high level basis. So go there, just to get the basic idea of what is happening. The background information section really tries to get to help folks understand, some of the context, what MLPs are, why MCAN views MLPs to be the preferred type of utility, which is something that we do feel. it also kind of establishes the policy context within which MLPs are working with, and for that matter, the entire state is working with. We wanted to establish, to give summaries of some of the policies in the Commonwealth and explain a little bit about how they relate to MLPs. The next section really just gets into how we did this analysis, our methods, our data collection process, and critically, some of the changes that we made from 2019 to 2021. And that is complemented by our appendix, which is fairly comprehensive as well. The next section is a really, I would say this is the meat of the report. And what this section does is it really goes through each performance category and it provides a number of pieces. It really breaks it down, and it does so by providing an overview of what this section is and why we feel it's important to measure. Description and a breakdown of our methods. So we go, again, more in depth around the methodology. An overview of the scores that MLPs received in each respective category. So that is different from the last report. We actually provide tables which break down what happened in each one of those performance categories. And following that, we provide an analysis of our results and some observations that we found, as well as recommendations for how stakeholders can enhance efforts in each of their respective categories. And, we list these recommendations in several different places, but we also break it down. We try to explain why this is important, why we feel it's important, and what exactly it looks like in practice. So we're really excited about this section, and we hope that, if there is a section that you go to, definitely make sure that you're checking out the breaking down the scores section. The next one, we wanted to also provide a little bit of an inside look into what do MLPs need to do in order to receive a good score. And in order to do that, we highlight 5 MLPs that scored well in one or multiple performance categories, and kind of just break down a little bit more about kind of what led to a good score there. And I just want to say here, these are not the top 5 performing MLPs. And the real primary reason for choosing these MLPs is collectively, they allowed for us to provide a comprehensive understanding of what it takes to score well in each one of the performance categories. The final section, which is not listed here, is a conclusion and a discussion of future reports. MCAN does remain committed to this work of assessing progress across MLPs. And while we feel we made excellent progress in this report, we know that there's some things that we missed, some areas that we'd like to improve. And so we discussed that there. I will just highlight one in particular that we, moving forward, are very committed to, is incorporating a new performance category specifically focused on issues of environmental justice, equity, and access. That was something that we were able to include in various different parts of the scorecard, but we really want to emphasize it, and we were unable to do so with the data that we had. But we are committed to doing that in future reports. So, of course, as part of this, a major piece of this scorecard is the scores, which I will present in just a moment. But I want to just give some context and kind of explain how we view the scores. So, first off, the reason why we provided the scores and the rank and the scores was to compare progress across MLPs. That's it. That's really the main thing. It's just to compare so that folks can see kind of what's going on elsewhere, and how everything relates to one another. We also provided ranks in this scorecard, and this is different from prior scorecards. And the reason we did this was so that there could, the scores and the ranks could kind of be interpreted in two different ways. We were really conscious, and we really did not want scores to be interpreted in the way, okay, so it's 0 out of 100, which means that a 90 or above is an A, so that must be good, and an 80 or an 80 to 90, that's a B, so it's okay, et cetera, et cetera. That is not how our scores break down. That is not the right way to assess the results. So there are quite, and I'll get into it in a second, the scores are lower than would be needed in order to assess that, and that's because of the methods that we used. The other thing I do want to just emphasize is we did not indicate, which score is, indicate success or, an MLP being unsuccessful. The goal here, again, is to just compare so that folks have a good understanding of what's happening in their community relative to other communities. Going off of that, I want to include a few disclaimers about the scoring. So number one, and this is very critical and mentioned across multiple different places in the scorecard, the scores presented in this version cannot be compared to the scores that were presented in 2019. And that is because we changed our methods, we changed our data collection processes. It just would not make sense, and it would not be useful to do that comparison. In future reports, we believe that the changes we made will enable us to keep things steady moving forward. And we are excited about future capability to compare over time. But just that's something really important to keep in mind. The other thing that we wanted to express is that, we tried our best to take in a whole bunch of different factors and to be very comprehensive in our methods. But there is a wide diversity of opinions across MLPs about what is the most effective way to transition to a clean energy future. And, we want to respect that. We want to acknowledge that. And the biggest way we do that, aside from being explicit, and providing a written disclaimer, is just being transparent. And we hope that this transparent will enable relevant stakeholders to use this scorecard, and even if you don't agree 100% with all of the methods, to use this scorecard as a tool moving forward, and to really hopefully identify some ways that it can be useful to you. So with that, I am going to present the scores, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a few observations that we made. I want to just emphasize these will be public right after this presentation. So if you have questions, you want to know how an MLP got where, the scorecard will be available. So I encourage you to look at that. And these are the results that we have. And so I will just go through a few things. First, something to note, the average score was 45 points. So that's where the average was across MLPs. The median score, differing between the top scoring 20 MLPs and the bottom scoring MLPs was 39.5. The other thing that I do just want to highlight is there is a wide variety of scores. As you can see, there are scores in the high 90s, and there are scores in the 20s. And it indicates that there is work to do. It also indicates the diversity of MLPs. MLPs differ in their size, in their geographic regions, in their resources. And so that very much so is a factor in this. In particular, with smaller MLPs who may not have performed as well, that could very well be because they didn't have the technical or financial resources to do everything that they would have liked to if they did. It could be for another reason, but that, those are factors that should be considered when you're looking at these scores. So these are the scores. Get one last look, and then we're going to move on, because for us, and this is something that we've emphasized elsewhere and will continue to emphasize, the scores are not the priority, and they're not the main focus of this report. The focus is the conclusions that we made and the recommendations that we put forward for how to how to advance efforts in the future. And so towards that end, I am going to just briefly go through the key conclusions that we drew. So the first conclusion that we found is several MLPs are demonstrating leadership and ambition in the clean energy transition and in energy efficiency. While there's no question that there much remains to be done to transition MLPs, several are leading the way, and they're being bold. They're taking very bold steps in climate mitigation and in transitioning to clean energy. And that's relative to other MLPs. It's also relative to investor-owned utilities. And for us, their efforts are proof that MLP's unique structure as community-based nonprofit utilities is proof that those attributes can serve as an important asset in mitigating climate change when these things are prioritized, when the transition is prioritized. The second conclusion, and this is a little bit more involved, so just bear with me if you're new to this topic. We did find that many MLPs have yet to recognize the value of retiring Class 1 renewable energy credits. And so why does MCAN think that retiring RECs is important? For those of you who are not really sure about this terminology, a utility's renewable energy percentage is determined by the ownership and retirement of renewable energy credits, specifically Class 1 renewable energy credits. RECs, I'm going to start calling them RECs. They represent the positive environmental attributes associated with certain types of energy production. So, for example, one REC is created each time a clean energy source generates a certain amount of energy. That's kind of how they come about. So it directly relates to the amount of energy being produced from clean energy sources. And specifically for Class 1 RECs, so that's kind of the cream of the crop. That's what we would identify as being the best, because they are newer, they are local, and they come from the cleanest energy sources, namely sources like wind, solar, geothermal, etc. So in utilities, across utilities, the way that we account for clean energy generation is through the creation and the retirement of renewable energy credits. And this is where things get a little bit sticky. RECs can be decoupled from energy generation, which is to say an entity can use energy that comes from wind, but not have the RECs and not retire the RECs. And when that happens, when RECs are not sold with their energy, or they're sold to someone else, that generation, no matter what source it is, it cannot be represented as clean energy. And that's just from a legal standard practice standpoint. And the reason why is because someone else has that REC. Someone else is accounting for that REC. That could be, in this instance, that could very well be an investor-owned utility that is using that for its standard, for the minimum amount of clean energy that they have to use. So while we're seeing MLPs are making considerable strides in developing and contracting for energy from clean energy sources, in many instances, this progress cannot be attributed to their energy mix because they are not retiring the Class 1 RECs associated with it. And if MLPs don't retire the RECs, this has real implications for statewide energy goals, because it means approximately 14% of the Commonwealth's electricity sector, which is what MLPs represent, will not be transitioning to clean energy at a pace that aligns with the rest of the state. And again, it's an accounting thing, but the accounting practice matters because it matters for other entities. It matters for the system. And that kind of goes into the second conclusion here, which is that the majority of MLPs are not aligned with statewide clean energy levels as outlined in the renewable portfolio standards. So the RPS is essentially, is essentially a clean energy standard. It means that in a certain year, a utility has to have a certain amount of certain percentage of their total mix has to come from clean energy sources. And in 2019, for example, that was 14%. In 2021, I believe it was 18%. Now, it's important to note, and I'm sure that some of the folks who are familiar with the policy will be saying, well, MLPs are not required to adhere to this RPS, and that is absolutely correct. They are not legally required to adhere to the renewable portfolio standards given current Massachusetts law. That still does not change the fact that if they are not retiring Class 1 RECs, part of our electricity sector will be behind other parts of the electricity sector and our standards, our minimum standards moving forward. So it does have real implications. With that, and we explain a lot more there. So if you're still confused, go read the report. There's a whole bunch in there about it. We try to be as clear as possible on that point. The third conclusion is that many MLPs are providing a wide variety of programs to support their customers in adopting clean energy technology. So it was great to see 100% renewable energy tech, or excuse me, 100% and clean energy programs, which allowed residents to opt in and to say, I'll pay a little bit more for clean energy. And that clean energy was determined by retiring RECs. Same goes for, we saw a good amount of investment in the MLP solar rebate program, which was a partnership between MLPs and the Department of Energy Resources. That was very exciting to see. And we're seeing that several the vast majority of MLPs have net metering policies. However, in some instances, we believe that more can be done to strengthen these policies and to ensure that they're actually incentivizing residents to transition to these technologies. And a particular example there is net metering. We noticed that there were a few barriers in many policies that might inhibit the ability for residents to use these effectively to transition to solar, say to get solar on their roof. The fourth conclusion relates to energy efficiency. And our report found that on average, the percentage of total revenue that MLP spend on energy efficiency is approximately 1/12 of the revenue percentage that IOUs allocate towards mass save. And again, kind of state regulation and laws does come into play. MLP or mass save, which is the energy efficiency program used by that is available for investor-owned utility customers. It's very regulated. There are very clear requirements about what the utilities have to do, how much they have to spend, etc. And in addition, they get a lot more funding from the state. So this gap could be closed, just by MLPs probably emphasizing more. But there is a good chance that if we want to really close this serious disparity in spending, more state support might be needed. And I do just want to say, MLPs are not as regulated in their energy efficiency programs, there are some benefits to that. And the first benefit being, it allows them to be innovative. It allows them to really focus on the needs of their customers and make sure that they're really fitting the programs to the communities that they serve. On the other hand, it does leave open the possibility that they're not providing programs that are on par with the rest of the state. And that results in, not seeing the savings come through, et cetera, et cetera. So there are implications to both sides, but this was a conclusion that we drew. The next conclusion is very much so related to that, and it is more attention is needed to increase access to MLPs energy efficiency programs. And specifically what we're referring to here is ensuring access for low-income residents, communities at risk, renters, etc. Here again, in Mass Save, there are very specific requirements about how much needs to be spent to, income eligible residents. What efforts need to take place to reach out to lower income residents and renters. And that is not the case in MLPs. So we are seeing some voluntary activity. It's not something that they're required to do. And it was great to see that, the majority of MLPs are providing resources on their energy efficiency programs in multiple languages. Fewer MLPs are providing enhanced rebates for low income, moderate income residents. And similarly, we didn't see as much specific outreach to vulnerable communities, renters, et cetera. So this is an area where we see a lot of opportunity for MLPs to continue to grow and expand on their work here. Conclusion 6, I think this is kind of evident based on what I've already been saying, but MCAN found that the state, the state can do more to support MLPs in areas of energy transition and energy efficiency. There's no question that MLPs and the local communities have a lot of work to do, and that in no way is in question with this conclusion. On the other hand, there are multiple avenues that the state could and MCAN feels should take to support them in this process. And state that in particular means state provided financial and technical assistance, just to ensure that that they have all the tools at their disposal to transition at the same rate as the rest of the state. And it does not mean financial and technical assistance is I think what we prioritize. There may be other options in changing laws, increasing incentives, etc. The final conclusion that I want to touch on before passing the mic to Sarah is that justice and equity in the energy sector need to be at the center of MLP policies, programs, and operations. Things that utilities do on a regular basis, like investing in energy infrastructure, implementing policies, and developing programs for ratepayers, they all have the potential to either exacerbate or alleviate existing injustices in MLP territories across the state and even across the region. And so presently, what we're seeing is that issues of equity and justice are rarely emphasized in MLP policy, and this lack of attention to justice-related issues has led to investments in dirty in energy and infrastructure that exacerbate injustices and disproportionately harm low-income communities, communities of color, non-English speaking communities, and renters. And so this is something that we feel MLPs can do more to emphasize these important issues, and they should especially do so in policies that are designed to mitigate climate change and to transition to clean energy. These have to center equity and justice if we're going to see a just energy transition. So that is the conclusion of the conclusions. And with that, I want to pass it over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the recommendations that we have based on these conclusions.
Great. Thank you so much, Logan. That was fantastic. So I'm going to walk us through specific recommendations by the various categories that we structured the report around. And our first recommendation that we're going to focus on begins with highlighting pathways for action in energy transition. And so first, we recommend that MLPs incorporate Class 1 REC retirement into their long and short-term strategies. Logan very eloquently explained what Class 1 RECs are and why retiring Class 1 RECs is a core and strategic accounting practice that MCAN believes is necessary to get a handle on the statewide effort to transitioning to clean energy. And retiring these renewable energy credits associated with locally generated clean energy really ensures that MLPs are tracking their contributions. So this is our first recommendation in energy transition. Our second recommendation in energy transition is that MLPs strengthen and enhance policies that enable residents to make this transition to clean energy. And there are several components to this. One, MLPs can strengthen net metering policies. They can leverage the innovations that they are currently doing to enhance battery storage, to enhance two-way communication between customers in the grid, advanced metering infrastructure, but also electric vehicle adoption and infrastructure. And a third very specific approach includes strengthening and expanding services that really assist low-income and moderate-income households in their transition to clean energy. Lastly, MCAN does believe that the state has an opportunity to invest in MLPs' abilities to do this transition with a focus on innovation, and the opportunity for increasing investment in the clean energy transition has great potential, we believe, to accelerate what munis are able to achieve. Moving us along, continuing with energy transition, MCAN recommends that munis implement plans to transition off of nuclear energy and gas services. MLP's progress in transitioning away from fossil fuels and towards non-emitting energy sources has largely relied on nuclear and hydroelectric energy. And we strongly believe that MLPs have an opportunity now to think about long-term planning for transitioning off of these particular sources. We fully acknowledge the need to rapidly transition away from fossil fuel sources while recognizing the danger that nuclear energy poses to communities. And for a just transition to occur, MCAN believes that these particular energy sources must be replaced with clean energy technologies and clean energy such as wind, solar, and geothermal. Moving us along to our last recommendation in the energy transition category. We call on MLPs to stop investing in new fossil fuel infrastructure and dirty energy projects. And we recommend that MLPs take this opportunity. There's a national momentum, there's statewide momentum to commit to no new investments in coal, in oil, and gas projects and infrastructure, and to also commit to making no investments in dirty biomass energy. And lastly, to commit to making no investments in projects that exacerbate the inequities and perpetuate environmental injustices. So recent energy projects have shown that despite the Commonwealth's clear direction towards a clean energy future, that some MLPs are still making these kinds of long-term investments in fossil fuel infrastructure and other kinds of dirty energy projects. Many of you on this call tonight, you're very familiar with the 60 megawatt combined cycle peaker plant that the association MWIC has proposed to build in Peabody. And others on this call may be familiar with the Palmer Biomass Facility out in Springfield, Mass., a project whose permit was recently revoked by the Department of Environmental Protection and may not be built. So MCAN strongly recommends that MLPs use their authority and really exercise leadership and a commitment to a public good that alleviates rather than exacerbates the disproportionate impact of our energy system, again, on low-income communities, communities of color, non-English speaking residents, and renters in particular. I am going to move into a different category. I'm going to be sharing our recommendations associated with energy efficiency. So we're going to shift gears and think about energy efficiency, specifically the energy efficiency of homes, businesses, and the MLP energy system overall is really crucial for solving the climate crisis. And as public utilities, MLPs provide programs and rebates for customers, both residential and commercial, that support and incentivize energy efficiency practices and the adoption of energy efficient technologies. And these incentives, as many of you know, focus on home improvements, including weatherization and insulation, as well as transitioning to more energy efficient heaters, i.e. heat pumps, and upgrading lights and appliances. We strongly recommend that MLPs increase this work, increase the size of energy efficiency programs and rebates, increasing the size of weatherization and heat pump rebates for residents, and then work with the state to create and adopt a 0% interest loan program for energy efficiency retrofits. We also recommend implementing and expanding commercial energy efficiency programs and offerings, as well as increasing the percentage of overall revenue allocated to energy efficiency programs. Again, this is a core part of addressing the climate crisis. Our second recommendation focused on energy efficiency is for MLPs to ramp up their focus on equity within and access to these energy efficiency programs. And this includes a couple of different things. This includes MLPs providing increased energy efficiency rebates for low-income and moderate-income homeowners and renters, but it also includes MLPs targeting and conducting specific outreach to low-income residents and renters who stand, frankly, to benefit the most from these energy efficiency programs. Lastly, MLPs can identify households in their territories based on income, race, and language isolation, and to use these disaggregated data sets, if you will, to continue to reach out to these particular ratepayers and raise awareness of their offerings for these individuals. And so despite the lack of an existing mandate, MLPs have voluntarily implemented practices to increase access among these groups, low-income, Black and Brown, non-English speaking households, as well as renters. However, MCAN strongly feels that more can be done so that these programs are fully accessible. And this aspect of energy equity is particularly important in light of how the state and this country were still trying to grapple and emerge from a COVID pandemic. And the pandemic has had, as many of you know, a disproportionate impact on frontline workers, low-income communities, communities of color, and non-English speakers. Moving us along to our third recommendation regarding energy efficiency. MCAN recommends that MLPs actually track savings and the progress of these energy efficiency programs. MLPs are not doing this as much as we would like, but should be. And one way of tracking and reporting on the kilowatt hours savings from these programs, these energy efficiency programs, is to report them out in the annual municipal action plans that MLPs provide. So tracking and making public energy savings, making them public, is a way that enables MLPs to be accountable for addressing issues of equity in their individual districts. So IOUs, the investor-owned utilities that participate in the Mass Save program that Logan has referred to earlier tonight, those utilities are required to track their savings. And we think this is a great opportunity for MLPs to do something similar and have these tracking be key indicators to be used for program evaluation, integrated resource planning strategies, as well as planning in general for a net zero future. Moving us along, our last recommendation in the energy efficiency category does propose that the state support, there can be increased state support for Munis work in energy efficiency in order to mitigate disparities in these programs between what Logan was referring to earlier, the Munis and the investor-owned utilities. And mitigating this disparity can include providing more funding, specifically to enhance energy efficiency work through rebates, but also allocating more funding to support innovative programming and pilot projects in interested Muni districts. I am now going to transition us to the transparency and community engagement category. And we have a couple of recommendations in this category. And our first recommendation is to ensure that MLPs websites contain updated information for residents to engage in local decision making. And so again, given that MLPs are publicly owned, serving the residents directly, making sure that residents have this up-to-date information about where they can get involved in investing in their energy future is really important. Our second recommendation in this category focuses on increasing not just access to information, but opportunities for community involvement in decision making. And we recognize that MLPs currently, many of them conduct surveys and hold community forums, but we think more of that can be done and done regularly related to specific decisions around policies and long-term strategies. And we do think that MLPs can solicit feedback. Some do now, but we would love it if if MLPs solicited feedback as a regular practice and get support from community members on proposed energy projects and these long-term policies. And that MLPs work to develop clear protocols and procedures to substantively incorporate community input into policies and strategies. And this is part of regularly soliciting feedback and then taking that feedback into account in formal in-house decision-making processes as well. So again, we want MLPs to really live into their role as the truly public utility in the state by providing residents real, clear, and direct opportunities for involvement, especially when it comes to these large-scale investment projects like a peaker plant. Our last recommendation in the transparency category is that MLPs, we're going to circle back to this topic one more time, are transparent about clean energy and retiring their renewable energy credits. And so as Logan has commented on before, this is a real critical accounting practice, and being transparent about these retirement strategies and explaining the implications of REC retirement for the Munis energy mix is important, both for accounting purposes, for monitoring progress, but also in terms of transparency. I'm going to transition us to the last category of recommendations, the policy context. So our first recommendation in this category is for MLPs to work with towns and for towns to work with their MLPs to establish climate action plans. Every Muni is unique, which also means that the local policy tools also vary quite a bit. And so MCAN recommends that MLPs and town government and town committees really come together to develop and implement these climate action plans in order to create the kind of policy environments that support an accelerated approach to combating the climate crisis, Muni district by Muni district. And this can also include, and we recommend this, that MLPs do an inventory of their MLP-related greenhouse gas emissions and develop a long-term plan for reducing these emissions to net zero before or definitely by 2050. The second category in the policy, or I'm sorry, the second recommendation in the policy category is for MLPs to participate in statewide programs focused on increasing efficiency and transitioning to clean energy. And so there are a series of programs, state level programs that MLPs can take advantage of. MCAN recommends that MLPs work with towns to obtain what is called the Green Community Designation, which allows for state funding to flow into program offerings. In addition to that, MCAN also recommends that MLPs participate in something called the Renewable Energy Trust Fund. Although in the next slide, I'll go over this a little bit more, we propose some modifications that need to be made so that this is an easier program for MLPs to take advantage of. And lastly, we propose that MLPs opt into another program called the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And the point being that there are these state programs that can both provide funding and other kinds of support for muni districts at the state level. However, I do want to specifically address some of these challenges. And so our last recommendation in this category really calls on the state and these programs in particular to reduce the barriers for MLP participation, because this is a conversation back and forth. And so reducing the barriers include reducing the requirements for MLPs to participate in the Renewable Energy Trust Fund. Given that existing participation among munis in the Renewable Energy Trust Fund is so low right now, we think that efforts need to be made to identify and reduce these barriers to increase participation. And so a more flexible form of membership might be one option going forward, because right now when a muni enrolls in the Renewable Energy Trust Fund, it's into perpetuity, and that has been cited as a significant barrier to enrolling in that program. We also make recommendations that focus on ensuring there are no additional barriers for MLP towns to obtain green community status. And right now there are unnecessary barriers for communities in MLP districts that serve multiple municipalities. So specifically, requirements are imposed which mandate that if an MLP municipality wants to become a green community, that the entire MLP district must adopt a renewable energy charge. However, because other municipalities in the MLP may either not want to be a green community or have already received the designation without adopting the charge, because that part of the community is served by an IOU, these municipalities are not realistically able to get the green community designation. And this is a fix. We can fix this. So despite we also recommend the development of new state sponsor programs to really support MLPs in addressing climate change and specifically increasing energy efficiency efforts. So I do want to conclude here for this particular recommendation by saying that although MLPs are independent utilities focused on addressing the needs of their local communities, we strongly believe the state has a role to ensure that these communities are being not left behind in the transition to clean energy. Wow, that is a lot of information to digest. So I do want to focus on some next steps that folks can take right now. Before I go over these, I want to emphasize a couple of things. I really want to emphasize what Logan mentioned earlier, but because of all the shenanigans, maybe people have forgotten that this report is intended for advocates. It's intended to be an advocate. You really know your munis, you know your light board members, and this is intended to offer some pathways for mutually agreed upon, we hope, actions that will ensure that MLPs are really being leaders in energy transition and energy efficiency, and increasingly in addressing energy inequities. So what can you do right now, tonight, tomorrow, over the weekend, the next week? Because this report is really kind of a series of pathways for the next few years. First of all, you can read the report. You don't have to read the whole thing like Logan said. You can focus on the executive summary. That's great. And as soon as this event is over, give us maybe 10, 15 minutes. The scorecard is going to be published on our website, and we have extracted sections of it so that, for example, you can just download the executive summary, or you can download just the section on energy transition. So take a read, take your time. There's a lot to digest. Share the report with your networks. Share the report if you have relationships with your light board members. Share it with your light board members. Share it with your homeowners association, if that's the case. Share it with your sustainability committee members. So really digest, disseminate. And if you are so inspired, if you are so motivated, and there is no MCAN chapter in your community, give us a call, give us an email shout out, and we can connect on. So part of MCAN's, one of our core parts of our mission is to really support local change. And so that's something else. That's another avenue for action. I also really want to stress that this report is really intended to bring together all the stakeholders that we have mentioned tonight, all of us, right? So get to know your light board members, right? Introduce yourself, get to know your Muni's general manager, as well as your legislators, as well as who is on your sustainability or your energy committee, who is in town thinking about drafting a climate action plan. So this report is intended to inspire, motivate, and connect people around shared visions of the future. And as always, consider MCAN your resource. You can reach out to me, to Logan, with any kinds of questions. And lastly, I am going to drop into the chat a real easy way for you to continue to invest in MCAN's work related to the scorecard. And it's very simple. This is just an opportunity, if you are so motivated, to make a one-time donation to our work on the scorecard. It will keep us going. With that, I am going to pass the mic to Logan. I have not been monitoring the chat, but if there are any questions that people have, this is the time to ask them. Either, have we enabled the chat function, Logan?
I don't believe that folks have been able to post in the chat. I may be mistaken, but I do think that people can raise their hands.
Great.
So maybe if we, and now you should be able to chat. So if you would prefer to pop a question in the chat, that's okay. If you'd like to raise your hand, that works as well.
Okay, thank you, Logan. So if folks have any questions about the methods, any questions about specific recommendations, or some of our conclusions, now is the time to either drop your question into the chat or raise your digital hand, and we will call on you. It is a lot to take in all at one time. And I will say that, this report has been over a year and a half in the making, and it is long. And Jerry, okay, he has not yet finished his thought. So we really encourage you to read it and to drill down into some of the specifics that we propose as pathways for action for advocates, but also for light board members, for munis, for municipal government, as well as legislature. So we do have some questions here, Logan.
Yeah, so I'll start reading them out. It's great to see that they're coming in. So first I have one from Malcolm Cummings. Are there advantages to establishing a municipal light in an urban town currently in Eversource territory with a goal of a rapid energy transition?
That is a fascinating question. That's really fascinating, because when I first started working at MCAN, I was told that it's not legally possible to establish a municipal light plant utility district. That's not true at all. It is, however, very, very expensive. And so that It does require that the town, that the establishment of a muni district, you have to invest. That entity, the MLP, has to invest in both energy generation and distribution. So it's an interesting concept. I think it is too financially daunting to be, depending on the urban area. I could be wrong because I'm not really sure where you're pointing to, but it does pose some serious daunting financial challenges.
If I could just add in very quickly, I think also just if you're thinking about doing this, in light of what we've established, we've essentially, seen that there are MLPs that can be, if your goal is a rapid transition, there are MLPs that are doing that. For starting a new MLP, making sure that you're establishing that as a key part of the mission, and you're being clear on exactly what that looks like. If you're establishing it, you have a great opportunity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I see Sandy Richter's question. Conclusion 4 seems to be comparing points that aren't equal. What MLPs spend should not be compared to what Mass Save allocates. What does Mass Save results show? I can tackle that one if
Sure.
it's okay. So Sandy, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I definitely hear where you're coming from, where they are different. I think that the intention with putting that out there is just to acknowledge that even though they are different, and even though there may be some, various different, justifications for why they are different and why maybe it doesn't make sense to compare them, it's still pretty significant. And the results, what we found, the reason why we made that comparison is it wasn't just about that single point. And so I want to also emphasize Mass Save had nothing to do with the scoring, nothing at all to do with the scoring. We did use it in instance to compare various different things, but we do acknowledge that it's different. And we also understand that, again, the state is providing a whole bunch of support for that program and also regulating it pretty specifically. I see a question from Jackie Pratt. How frequently will you be reviewing these reports? Annually, every other year?
So Jackie, are you asking how frequently are we going to be publishing a scorecard? Holy Hannah, we're not doing it every year. This was a real heavy lift. And so probably every 3 years. And so we've already started planning, in very big conceptual ways, sort of themes as we discussed tonight or presented tonight, that the third scorecard will focus on. I think our conclusions and the recommendations that we have put forward tonight, I think can be effective for at least the next 3 to 5 years. And then as efforts evolve over time, as MCAN supports advocates, as hopefully MCAN and munis can coordinate on things, that this time after the scorecard, after the second scorecard is released, will inform, right, both the scope and the direction of the third report card, the third scorecard. So I hope that answers your question, Jackie. Every other year, that terrifies me. We don't have the capacity to do that, but every 3 years we do.
I have a question from Jerry, which is kind of an ongoing, but he speaks about the Peabody Peaker as being a pretty bad way of moving forward, and asks how MCAN can change this. He specifically lists lack of transparency, refusal to share key information, inaccurate assertions, and resistance to change. What role for new legislation, and kind of how can MCAN change this?
This is a great question. So for folks on the call that are not familiar with the Peabody Peaker, this was a project that one of the Municipal Light Plant Associations, MWIC, embarked on about 6 years ago. And it didn't get a lot of play. there was not a lot of, as Jerry mentioned, a lot of information sharing at that point in time. And this proposal is for a 60 megawatt gas and oil powered peaker plant. So a plant that is turned on when demand exceeds supply, like on really hot days and increasingly on really cold days. So the problem with the way that that MWIC and that MWIC has engaged in this process was brought to us, and MCAN entered into a legal process through the Department of Public Utilities. MWIC had requested that DPU approve financing for this dirty peaker plant, this fossil fuel peaker plant. And advocates were outraged. So we entered into a legal process through DPU. We did not, MCAN, representing many ratepayers in muni districts across the state. The DPU did not give us full legal standing in those proceedings. Long story short, DPU approved the financing for this dirty peaker plant. And so now the legal avenues are less clear. And, moving forward, Jerry, this is a campaign that, MCAN is continued to invest in and continue to support the local PBD group that Jerry is a part of, which is Breathe Clean North Shore. And one of the things that I think is really relevant for folks on the call to realize that this proposed gas and oil power plant is slated to be built within an environmental justice community and within less than a mile of 8 other environmental justice communities. The state has recently redrawn their environmental justice maps. And once those were updated, it became really clear that the particular siting for where this will be is problematic. And also the particular investment in more fossil fuel infrastructure at this point in time remains problematic. And this is one instance, as many of you are probably deducing on this call, where MCAN and MWIC, we have different values, at least that's what it appears like, around this kind of investment strategy. So there's the risk that this peaker plant will become what is called a stranded asset. There is a lot of evidence based on medical research that the kind of emissions generated by this plant will really contribute to local upper respiratory and asthmatic problems, especially for those folks immediately adjacent to the peaker plant once it's built. So in terms of next steps, Jerry, you all meet every week, and you can do continue to focus on the town hall, really putting pressure on boards of health to submit letters to the Baker administration. So this opposing the peaker plant is not over, and it's part of Breathe Clean North Shore's work as well as MCAN's work. And Logan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to just quickly add. So, Jerry raised a point about different solutions. This, we try to be very expansive in this report. We don't cover everything, and so there may be solutions and proposals outside of the bounds of this scorecard. That is entirely possible. We also make some broader suggestions, about this, not necessarily to be, we don't always want to be incredibly prescriptive in this particular document. So there's still work to do as far as figuring that out, and we want relevant stakeholders to come together on these issues and to try to figure out how we can get there and what legislation could look like, or if there's other solutions to these big issues. So I appreciate the question, Jerry. I see that there was one question from, and excuse me if I miss any in the report, is there some history about how MLPs got established in the state? I
You
can
know, this
say,
is a great question because I have been searching for a history of municipal light plants in the state. I cannot find one, like a really in-depth cultural, economic, energy-focused history. And so if there are any faculty on this call, any public historians that are interested in pulling this history together, kudos, let's work on that. We do a little bit of kind of an overview of what MLPs are. You know, we include the map of MLPs in the report. We spend some time, we spend some time on relevant policies that have contributed to the MLP scene, if you will, but we don't do an in-depth history. And so I think this is a fantastic opportunity for somebody to seek grant money, and MCAN can help you out if you really want to do that. I would love that.
The next question comes from Dodie, and it says, does the report indicate what portion of an MLP scoring in each section comes from bonus points? I can answer this very briefly. I can say it's not at the top table, but when you go into the sections, it does indicate that. We're unable to break down the bonus points as extensively as we are with the other factors, but we do break it down to some extent. So hopefully that you'll be able to see how many of the points came from bonus. I do also just want to say, bonus points in a lot of instances are substantial efforts. So it's not, the bonus is not necessarily to in any way minimize those efforts. And oftentimes the weight, even if it is a bonus, is similar or the same. I see that there is an interesting question from Kimberly. I love this question. A colleague who is an advocate in an IOU territory always points out to me that MLP customers are not paying their fair share for a clean energy transition. We get low rates instead of larger mass save energy efficiency rebates and having to comply with the renewable portfolio standards. Is it realistic to think the state and other towns in the state would be willing to offer MLPs more financial support for clean energy and efficiency when we pay so much less for energy?
This is a really interesting dynamic, right, Kimberly? So on the one hand, I can appreciate that perspective that MLP ratepayers put less in because you're not being charged as much. The flip side of that is that MLPs to a certain extent are, because of their, the state has less prescriptive oversight, MLPs are under-resourced. And so I think those two perspectives are kind of the same coin. And I think there is a shared, intention, agenda within the Commonwealth that collectively our entire energy system needs to ramp up and needs to, more renewables, more energy efficiency programs, serving low income, moderate income, hard to reach customers better. So I think, there are some, some of our recommendations hint at this, right? That we don't necessarily believe direct coordination between Eversource and a muni district is ever going to happen. That's not the point. The point is, from a statewide perspective, that MLPs and investor-owned utilities need to be sort of tracking each other, around shared goals. Logan?
If I could also just add in, I think it's a give and take. There are various different areas where I do think that MLPs can make a reasonable case for, hey, we need more support here. On the flip side of things, I do think that there are going to be instances where IOUs sent, and folks, who represent those IOUs in many those regions in many different capacities are going to make the case, hey, you're not paying your fair share. And it is going to be a consistent back and forth. I would echo Sarah's sentiment of Yeah, we have to find a way to kind of work together and figure it out. And we've identified a few ways where we might be able to do that. I also want to like MLP innovation. That is a perfect way for the state to benefit through funding various different programs taking place across, municipal light plants. MLPs have the unique, or I would argue a more unique ability to be innovative because of their structure. And so let's encourage that. Let's give, more money to making sure that that's happening, because that will ultimately benefit the rest of us across the state.
Great. Thanks, Logan, for your sentiments there and your perspective. Very helpful. It is 7:30 right now, and I just want to give somebody else the mic just for a moment. And I'm going to ask Steve Cowell, if you don't mind coming off video and unmuting yourself, or Logan, maybe you can unmute him. There you go, Steve. You're unmuted, and feel free to put on your video if you so choose.
Okay, I'm trying to, but it's not letting me do it, so you can't see me. But I always want to say this is great. We funded MCAN's first, project, and we will fund the next one too, because this is excellent. Great job, Sarah and Logan. This is important. We can't separate the work of munis versus IOUs. We have to be together, working together, achieving the goals that have been established in the new, legislation. So, good job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And I do want to say, because it's an automated thing at this point, the scorecard is now public and it is accessible on MCAN's website. I was hoping it would hold back until we got off, but it can be found at the link that I've just dropped in the chat. As Sarah said, please take a look, take your time, digest it, send it around, and we're really looking forward to using this as a tool moving forward to bring about a just energy transition.
Thank you, Logan. Thank you, everybody, for attending. And a final thank you for all of our external reviewers. Couldn't have done this without you guys as well. And with that, we're going to conclude our event, somewhat exciting event tonight. And I have dropped, if you are so motivated, so inclined, the one-time donation into the chat. If you are so motivated, you can certainly take advantage of that. All right. Thanks, Janet, for being on the call, and a big shout out to Steve for his support, future support. And thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been great. And don't hesitate to reach out with questions if you have them. And have a good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jane, for being on the call.